All right, and for anyone who's watching and wondering, we're just giving people a couple minutes because it takes a minute for this to open up. All right, and I can see we're live now on YouTube. So let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 30 to 80 live stream. I'm so excited to be here today with Nikhil Deshpande from Georgia Digital Services. 30 to 80 is an accelerator program for people in government improving public-facing digital services. The name is a reference to the industry average success rate at 30% or below, depending on which studies you're looking at. With a 42% chance of beating the casino at blackjack, you literally have a better chance of gambling than delivering a successful government technology project. Our mission is to reset that default to 80% or higher. So that's what 30 to 80 is about. On these live streams, I reach out to people who are out in the world doing great things in government, who have success stories to share that we can learn from, that we can build on, so that we're not reinventing wheels and spending our brain power on unnecessary headaches. And so I've reached out to Nikhil. He is the leader of one of the oldest running state digital service teams. And I'm so excited to talk to him about some of his reflections on where he's come from and where they're headed next. So Nikhil, I wonder if you could just kick us off today by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about Georgia Digital Services.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Brian, and always fun to chat with you. And I feel like this is just something we are going live, but this feels like we're chatting anytime we met each other at conferences or other events. So yeah, I'm Nikhil Deshpande. I'm Chief Digital and AI Officer with the state of Georgia. And I've had the privilege of establishing the digital services program within the state. And the focus of the program really is to make sure that we enable agencies to do their jobs better and more effectively. And it's essentially we team with them in a collaboration to make sure that the services that they provide are very constituent focused. And a lot of times when we looked around, we saw that there was a gap in certain skill sets where we may have certain technology skill sets, but the product piece was missing or the UX piece was missing. And Georgia is a distributed ownership model state. So in the other terms, we'll call it a pretty heavily federated state. So what that means, like every agency, every organization runs a particular service and they get to decide how they offer it, how they run it, who gets to do the technology. Either it could be in-house, it could be outsourced, however. And there isn't really any guiding principles as far as a cohesive state of Georgia, family. So that's something we wanted to change. And we could only change that in the way that we can partner and get their buy-in to be able to do that in a better way. So really that was the genesis. And this was actually, to be perfectly honest with you, this was very heavily influenced by a blog post that Jen Falca had written back in 2016. If my memory serves me right, it was called the CIO problem. And in there, she had very beautifully, I mean, I'm a big fan of her and her writing. She had illustrated the value of the concept of digital services. And I think that's when she had successfully put the USDS team together, which was also based on the digital services team in the UK. Now, although these are very different organizations and models, I think the intrinsic value of digital services team and the purpose was the same. And that's when we decided that this is something we should be advocating for. And I was happy to kind of lead that effort. And in 2017, Georgia actually announced the first digital services team.
Great. So I wonder if you could just run us through, we'll do a deep dive into a couple of topics in just a couple of minutes, but I wonder if you could just give us an overview, even though the names are so similar, US Digital Services, Georgia Digital Services, Massachusetts Digital Service, every state, every organization really has a sort of a different spin on it, a different way of organizing, a different context that they're situated in, and frequently different services. Sort of related, spiritually aligned, but sometimes different. I wonder if you could just give us an overview of, you've got a long list of really, helpful sounding services on your website. Can you just run us through them and talk through what Georgia Digital Services does?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Every state, or at the federal level, or even at the local government level, even though all of these services essentially have the same name as digital services, it really depends where you are situated within the overall landscape, within the ecosystem of your larger enterprise. And two things. One is like how empowered you are to be able to make a difference. And specifically for us, we evolved into digital services. It wasn't like, we had an executive order or there was a legislative mandate. We, through grassroots, I would say, advocated for this change, and then eventually were able to form digital services and change our approach to be able to work with agencies. But the evolution came from, prior to this, we were a web services team, and we still worked with multiple agencies. So just a quick, I would say, origin story would be that when I took my role, which evolved into this role, it was the director of web services. So when I took over, we were a very like a gallery of sorts, different agencies having different technologies to run their web presence. So we centralized that, and we created some sort of a order to it. We created certain governance structures around it, but the whole point was to be citizen-centric, constituent focused. We wanted to make sure that, yes, while we acknowledge the desire for certain organizations to have their individual branding, individual presence, but end of the day, we are one state of Georgia. And a constituent, normally doesn't look at an organization as you are the department of X, department of Y, only after they realize like exactly what they want. But for someone just looking into the government, they're just working, they're just interacting with the state of Georgia. And that's when, if we have fragmented digital presence, then that just really kind of betrays the trust that otherwise, they would hope to have in a seamless experience with their government. So and I'm sure you have seen, just like many of our viewers may have seen, that, as per like the more recent Pew Research, the overall trust in government is going lower and lower. And there are multiple factors to it. It need not be just state government or federal or local, but these are small things that add to that overall loss of trust. So by doing this, we truly were aiming at building the maturity across state agencies. So how can we do that, right? I mean, so we all know, like, people, processes, and technology. So technology comes last. It's really first the people. And that's kind of like really where we started, by educating, by training, by having conversations about a vision of having a more upskilled, digitally matured Georgia. And that could mean anything. That could basically mean that let's just get our web presence together. Because truly, if you look at it, websites are our policies, right? Like, you or me, even though we have been insiders, like, when was the last time we actually went and read through any of our laws and any of our bills? And very rarely, unless we have like a direct connection to it. But typically, you would just go to a website to absorb and understand what is the policy behind a certain service. And if that language is confusing, if that language is misleading, I mean, right there and then there's like the first set of failures that, start towards the overall service delivery. So we really still believe that the overall interaction should be robust, and the foundation of any service delivery is starting by the information of someone knowing what are they eligible for, what are they eligible, what are their requirements, what do they need to be prepped with. So once they are better prepared to interact, that just automatically adds to a better interaction. And then you can slowly move to the transaction layer of the web piece.
Yeah.
So
Great.
that was our starting point. And so we focused more on the content, the information, the overall structure of the content, making it searchable. And then slowly we started moving towards doing usability scans, doing accessibility scans. We kind of did like honestly, just like an overall horizon scan of like some of our top used services. And then as and when we actually got an in with an agency and an opportunity to work on that service, either we brought it up or, by us talking about digital services, next time, they saw opportunity, they pulled us in.
Yeah.
So, we had to ease into this.
Yeah. I wonder if I can just insert myself here. When you say when we get an in, I can picture what you mean because I've been inside government. I don't think everyone can. So I wonder if we can just take one step back. I see a list of 7 services on your website. And even though I hear you talking about constituents, and we're going to talk more about that, even though I hear you talking about constituents, the services listed on your website are for government agencies. They're not constituent-facing services. So I
Right.
wonder if we could just get the 2-sentence explanation, what is it and who uses it for
Okay.
each of these 7 services. So the first one is called GovHub Publishing Platform. What's that? Who's that for?
So GovHub is our web publishing platform. As I mentioned earlier, most agencies were using a different stack of technology to host their website, to maintain their content. So we created a centralized system for all agencies to host their websites. Of course, again, we don't have a mandate. So it was pretty much an open invitation for people to look at this platform and join if they like it. We started out with a very handful of agencies to join. And then as they saw what others benefited, this grew. This is based on Drupal. So Drupal, an open source content management system, is at the bottom of this platform. And we have, like I said, a centralized way of publishing. At this point, we have 95 some agency websites, and that goes all the way from having pretty large scale websites like the Department of Human Services, Labor, Revenue, um, community health, public health, all the way down to a lake up in North Atlanta, Lake Lanier. They have their own authority and their own website with probably like a few handful of pages. So the system is able to hold all of that, but the beauty of this is that it now allows a certain level of user experience. So as a Georgian, when they go to one or the other department websites, they all look very much of a familiar user experience, through their design, through their overall interaction. They're not identical, obviously. We wanted to give every agency a certain way of branding themselves through certain colors, but we still found a lot of elements that build consistency.
Great. Next is, we're going to skip this one because I know you're going to talk about it more later, Georgia Analytics Program. The next one on the list is Orchard Design System. What's that?
Yeah. So the Orchard Design System is one of our more recent products. And through GovHub, what we realized that initially the design was a baked element of the overall content management system. But if we were to isolate the design elements and systematize them, so for example, a certain agency or a certain organization don't want to be on GovHub, but they still want to have their own website. There is no reason why they cannot be visually aligned with the rest of the state agencies. So we didn't want it to be exclusive to anyone joining GovHub to be able to have that same official look by the state of Georgia. And then we also extended this to beyond just the websites that held content how about transactional websites, right? So there are so many elements that still can be very much reused by those transactional websites. We call them applications. And that's really, again, geared towards end user benefit of going to any state of Georgia digital property and then understanding purely by just looking at the maybe there's a header or the footer that okay, this is I am on a official state of Georgia digital property. Now, obviously, there is the URL that goes with it, but not everyone is, I would say, in tune with understanding what a .gov versus a .org difference is. So we really wanted to create a systematized approach for our design, and that's the reason why we built that design system.
Great. Accessibility auditing?
Yeah, that is something we have been very passionate about. Right from the inception of GovHub, and the previous versions of it, we wanted to make sure that accessibility is a core part of our web presence. This is to make sure our entire constituent base, regardless of their ability to view content, we make sure that our information is accessible. If someone is challenged by maybe a vision or limited motor skills or any other limited ability, they still should be able to use and understand and access our content as seamlessly as any abled person. So we wanted to, from day one, we wanted to make sure out of the box, GovHub was accessible. So we comply with WCAG 2.1 AA standards. And we know that accessibility is not a one and done deal. So we keep auditing that, and we make sure that anything that is not part of GovHub, any other transactional website or any other website that is a standalone website. So we have a partnership with the state ADA's office and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has a department that is purely focused on accessibility, and they hire folks who are accessibility expert, and most of their staff also is challenged in certain abilities. So we have our folks who are also aware of what needs to be tested, but also they are their own test subjects. So we call this Access GA, and we've been doing this since about 2018.
Great. So if I am the Secretary of Transportation and I launch a new website for people to renew their driver's licenses, and I want to make sure that people with low vision and no vision can use it, I could come to you and say,
Yes.
"Hey, Nikhil, can your team, tell us what to do here or help us fix whatever's broken?"
That's absolutely the intention of this. Yes.
Great.
And not just websites. We also have done some audits and an audit seems more reactive to something that's already been done, but we have worked with agencies while they were building things up. So, one of the agencies was actually building kiosks to be able to have certain services available for people, who might not have phones or computers. So we were able to test the accessibility, not just the digital aspects of the kiosk, but also the physical aspect of the kiosk, the space that leads to that kiosk. So there is some fascinating work that has happened, with this particular program.
Yeah. That's so great. And to be able to work with people as the technology is evolving. I worked with this developer who once I heard him describing this to another secretary, saying that when you try to make something accessible after the fact, it's like trying to make a chocolate chip cookie by jamming the chocolate chips into a sugar cookie after it's been baked. So that's an incredible service. I'm sure people have no idea how impactful it is that they can bring you along from the beginning. There are 3 more services listed that I want to get the quick versions of, and then I want to ask you some stories. So I see content strategy consulting. What is that?
This is really writing information in a way that is intended for constituents and users. We have a certain benchmark for the reading level that we should be writing for. And as any of us working within government, we know that there is a lot of policy talk that just gets converted and is copied and pasted on websites. And that is a very disconnecting point for anyone trying to understand what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to avail a service. Also, in general, organizations in the past, and I don't want to say this is very exclusive to Georgia, but government organizations in the past always thought of their website as an org chart of their organization and structured their website in a way that their organization was structured. So within an organization, there could be certain departments, but for a constituent, the organization website is their gateway into the service. And they would care less about, a certain department which existed but did something, that didn't really help them, right? I mean, they were very service focused. So we established this particular offering to make sure that we go in and we take the website, however it is designed, written, structured, and we make it very service focused. We keep the service at the center of it. And sometimes an organization has more than one services. So we really understand, like, why do people come here? And then how can their website reflect that? And then build everything around that. And for that, obviously we had a lot of challenge from the organization because, like, what do you mean I cannot put my commissioner's message on the homepage? But like, is a constituent really looking for that? If not, then like, why are we using that real estate for something that they're not looking for? That's prime real estate, right? So it's like some of these, I would say, uncomfortable conversations had to be had, but that actually helped us in getting a lot of these websites at a point where they truly became useful and usable. And, and thankfully we had the numbers to prove them.
Great. I see two more services listed here. Usability testing.
Yeah, so that's right there, right? I mean, we could do like a baseline of what your website did beforehand. We changed it, and then boom, now someone can get to what they're looking for within a certain number of clicks. And we never really resorted to like everything should be 2 clicks away or 3 clicks away, but like really what the intention was that does the user get to where they're looking for without getting confused or without having to call? And usability testing and usability service are exactly that. Is like, how are you doing? A lot of times, as again, we know when we work on projects and we work on the requirements, all the requirements point to an output. But very few times you have seen the requirements that actually point to an outcome. And usability testing truly kind of gives that benchmark of like, is really the outcome intended to what we were planning, but this is what it is. If there is a gap, how can we fix that? So it was really kind of just holding the mirror, but also then, working with them to kind of figuring out how can we change that.
Great. And then the last service listed here is Georgia.gov.
Yeah, so I mean, Georgia.gov is just like any other, I would say, state's flagship website. Though again, the point being is that a regular constituent doesn't need to understand the state machinery of, what they're looking for and which agency or the department or the subdivision handles that. They could just easily go to Georgia.gov, and we try and, have everything in a way that people can see where they need to go, where they need to access. Although we are not able to port all the content on Georgia.gov, we have pretty much a synoptical view of every service and all the key reasons why people come there. So again, we have like a feedback loop of understanding why people get there. If we see something that people are looking for that we don't have, we immediately make sure we have that service represented on Georgia.gov. And we kind of keep close links between, again, this is where the people come in. So we have a content team that manages Georgia.gov, and those folks have a pretty close association with the agency content communications folks. And anytime things change, we are able to update that timely.
Awesome. Okay, that was a great run through. So I wonder if now we can take a turn towards, like deep diving into some of these topics. I wonder if we could go way back to the very beginning of Georgia Digital Services. I was trying to remember, we first met 7 or 8 years ago. I was working with Massachusetts Digital Service at the time, and I think you were just about to start or you had just started this engagement with IDEO. And so I have this memory of this, big user research project that you were just starting. And I know that was foundational to the creation of a lot of the services you just walked us through. Can you take us back to 2016 or 2017 and tell us what was the origin of that research project. And then I want to get you to tell us about the research you did.
Yeah. So this was really when we were redesigning GovHub. We had the older platform running and serving websites, and the research that we had done in the past was not current, was not the most updated one. But we wanted to not just do research, but this is where we had realized that we need also a solid brand. We need a visual consistency. This is really kind of like the time when all of these services were just a idea in a list of ideas that we should do this, we should do that. But how can we actually move towards doing that? We needed some baseline. We needed, to understand what constituents, expected from the state. And we didn't want to just design something, plan something, decide something in a silo. So we basically asked, we put a bid out, we put an RFP out to seek design services, to seek services that helped us create a brand, a design direction, and also understand our users in a way that could help us with our platform that we were going to be architecting going forward. We did receive, obviously, just like any RFP, you would receive a bunch of bids, but I was actually intrigued by the bid that IDEO had submitted. And after scoring, obviously, they were the chosen partner, and then we started working with them. And I actually got to experience what design thinking really, kind of comes from the source, because they were the ones who actually came up with that term. So we worked with them truly in a way that, like, we worked along with them with our constituents. So we had, sacrificial concepts about certain design directions. But even before we did that, what you were alluding to was this road trip that some of the team members took going around Georgia. So we looked at the overall demographics, right? So all of us on the digital services team live in the Metro Atlanta area. So our personal experience obviously is pretty much within the bubble of, us surrounded by people who probably have like the most recent technology gadgets, and obviously in a well-connected area. But the services that we work on, are used by people all across Georgia. Someone living up in the mountains, someone, living on the plains, someone by the ocean. We wanted to make sure that, those expectations were met as well. And we worked on an overall questionnaire seeking what is it that we really wanted to learn from them and also observe. And then, a team set out to do that. And I mean, I wish I could join them. I just couldn't take that amount of time off from my day to day. But I was constantly in touch with them and cheering all of the things that they were doing, speaking with people, interviewing people, wherever possible, video, recording people, using some of the state services. And this was more of a effort of just, doing, again, a baseline of like, how are we doing today? And what do you think, we should be doing going forward? And like the overall findings were just, revealing and amazing. So we came back, synthesized everything, and that led to a lot of these efforts. And one of the effort was a overall state brand. Again, very similar to what Massachusetts did, what actually City of Boston did, where, they took like the old Boston brand and they redid that. And I believe IDEO was the same company who did that. So we wanted to, one thing we learned from the constituents was that, like, when we look at the government, anything that is part of government has that old seal on it. And, the feel of a government website is always something that reminds us of 10 years ago. So we want to see our government as modern as when we turn and start using some of the other web services. So how can we modernize that, but without losing the gene of, we are government and we still have a certain authority over certain things. But we wanna have those services rolled out in a friendly way. So there had to be that balance that to be struck. So we worked with IDEO on a lot of that visual branding, a lot of that branding that translated into today what we know as the design system. And then eventually also based on what we learned that helped us platform GovHub.
Right. Is there any, any story, any vignette, any example from the research that was done that has stuck with you, or that you might be able to point to that makes you feel like, we really nailed it on addressing X? Anywhere that you can sort of connect the dots, between what's going on now and what you learned back then.
I mean, there is definitely a lot of validation we're getting today on something that we heard back then by just seeing how some of these services are consumed. For example, mostly in the metro area, speaking with a certain demographic, people were just like, we don't really go to websites. We just pull up whatever I can Google, and whatever Google tells me, even without clicking a link, that is what I take as my marching orders. That made us think that why not make our content such that if we make it search engine friendly enough that it's fine if people don't come to our websites, but if Google can extract that content and display it on the search page itself, like that is exactly what we should be aiming for. And that was not possible back then. But then when we designed GovHub in a way, we were able to achieve that. But there were so many anecdotes, right? Like one of our questions was like, what does it mean that you're not able to actually interact with the government? And, some people said, well, that means a lot of frustration for me. But, some people said, well, actually, that means that my family doesn't eat next week, right? And the impact of what we do to someone even like be able to feed their family just feels like, we should not be taking those decisions lightly. And that made us truly, add so many of these technical steps within our testing before we rolled out services for, how does this service render for someone who has less than ideal network in their area? Like, what is the best way of graceful degradation? So, that level of maturity, which is honestly very just invisible when you look at a service, but when you access it with an older phone and a slower network, if you're still able to connect, if you're still able to use it, I mean, those are the things we feel like, we truly kind of understood.
Great. I'm just realizing it's already 2:30. Let's open it up to questions if some of the folks who tuned in have questions they want to ask. And then I've got lots more. I'd love to keep asking. I see the first one coming in, and folks who are, were on Zoom for the first time this week, there's a Q&A. If you've dropped questions in the Q&A, that's where we'll read them from, not the chat. So please use the Q&A feature. Okay, first question. How did you get buy-in for that kind of research?
So this was really something that I have been advocating for a while. And we have set an expectation that user research really needs to be part of any of the larger technology project that we, from a budget perspective, from an effort perspective, from a timeline perspective, we should understand our users, because at the end of the day, I mean, who are we building this for, right? So if we miss the mark on that, we are not going to get the ROI on the rest of our investment. So I think I would say this was something that was set as one of our principles of digital services. And then we also worked with our procurement teams to add some of the languages in their templates that were appropriate for larger projects, where like, have we done user research? Have we done user studies, so that we make sure that whatever we are building is truly aligned with what the outcome is. So I don't remember having to actually go knock on several doors trying to kind of, beg and convince people that we need to do user research. But we had enough evidence to show that because user research wasn't done. I mean, to your earlier stats of why most of government projects fail, right? Like there are so many components to why they do, but user research is one of them. And it's an integral part of the rest of the investment.
There's another question. We've never done user research like that. If we wanted to do something similar, where would we start? Is your RFP still online somewhere?
Oh yeah, all RFPs are online somewhere. I'm pretty sure it is. It still sits on our procurement website somewhere. But if you want to do something similar, I mean, I absolutely encourage everyone should be doing user research. And there is one aspect of doing user research for a certain project, but there's also a user research that should be done to make sure, specifically for someone like us as a state or even a city, things keep changing. There are different devices, different technologies, emerging technologies come across. Like, how do we not find ourselves, way too reactive and on that whole, innovation curve, like as like the late adopters or laggards. We even if we don't want to be like the super early adopters, we definitely should be like one of the early majorities. So we should be doing user research. For that, I think two things. You need the people, you need the budget, and 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 you need support to be able to achieve that. But I think the key is also to kind of have that feedback loop where like you need to show the value of user research being done and then how it affected the project. Because unless and until the folks who are purely focused on, the money or whatever process piece of it, they should be convinced by seeing the value of that. And if we had not done it, if we had not taken certain steps to develop this particular platform or this technology, then what could have happened? I think you need someone to kind of step back and connect those dots. It's not just about the activity of user research. Someone needs to look at the big picture and then show the value of that activity happening at the front end of the larger project.
Great. Nikhil, if after we're done, if you're able to help me find that RFP, I would be happy to send it around to the people who signed up for this webinar.
Yeah,
Folks
I
have
can
such
I can
trouble with
find it, send
procurement.
it to you.
Great, that's great. Okay, I see more coming in. Let's do one more, and then we'll go back to the other line of questions. It feels like all this great tooling that you created, a constant onboarding and training routine, is needed to make sure agencies are taking advantage of these tools. Is this the case?
Yeah. So GovHub hosts, I wouldn't say, about 76, 78 agencies out of, so there are total, I think about 100. It just keeps changing every year with legislation. New agencies are born, old ones merge. But I believe like there is a somewhere between 110 to 120 number of agencies. But if we think of like the high impact agencies that have the most touch points with constituents, they are all on GovHub. And that is the key, like Department of Revenue, Labor, Human Services, Governor's Office, um, Community Health, Public Health, Corrections, Bureau of Investigation, Public Safety. So these websites, they're all on GovHub. And again, like I said, there was no mandate. There wasn't any legislation that required. This is purely at the merit of GovHub and obviously the digital services team that not only provides a good product, but also provides a good support service of anyone using this product. So it's not just enough that we make this product available to them. We also work with every agency in training them. We have office hours. We obviously have, our support desk. So if they need help with content, if they need help with information architecture, they need help with usability, they kind of know, we kind of like um on their list of anyone who just like they need to swivel and reach out if they need any even if we are not able to help them, they also have us in a conversation where we point them to who can help them with whatever they're looking for.
So it's not just that, you've onboarded 90 sites to GovHub and that's easy, you know how to do it, but you're also providing onboarding resources for the agencies as their staff changes and they need people to get trained on GovHub and
That's
these tools.
absolutely, yeah. We have a continuous stream of trainings happening as and when content managers retire or new ones are onboarded. So we kind of have that, revolving door constantly happening, and we have a dedicated trainer that works with agencies and understands the different structures. Like for larger agencies, they have a little more complicated model that need to be trained. Not every agency leverages the exact same content types. So, we work with all of them in a way that, really benefits them.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and bring us back to some of my questions, but folks who got more questions, please keep them coming in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to 2 more rounds of questions here before we wrap. So, Nikhil, if we can just jump back into the story, you do this research project with IDEO. I think you told me that people in your office put 400 or 500 miles on their cars doing this research, right? That you just told us about? Is
Yeah,
that true?
yeah.
Okay, so you do this massive research project, you learn a ton, it really shapes, your thinking about GovHub. So many services have come online since. It feels like every year there's a new digital service team coming online in some state. We're up to, I think the count is 7 states that have digital service teams across the US.
Oh, is that
And
it? I
still,
thought it was more. Okay.
yeah, I was a little surprised when I went back and did the math too, but I can only count 7. I think there are 9 that have teams with chief digital officers and similar
Yeah.
teams. I think 7 named digital services. So there are still potentially 40, 43, that could come
Mhm.
online. So when you look back at your first 7 years of work, and you know, one thing that everyone has in common is that there's more need than there are resources, right? So everyone has to make the impossible decision of what are we going to do and what are we not going to do. And it's always helpful to know from someone else who's made that hard decision, what have they found to be really impactful? I know there's not just one thing, but if you could zero in on one thing that has been extremely impactful, you look back the last 7 years and you think this really made a difference, that you think other either new digital service teams that are forming now or the digital service teams in the next couple of years that remain to come online,
Yeah.
what would you want them to know about that's been really impactful for Georgia?
Um, if truly there was one thing, I would say talk about the impact of your work. And this is not to, I would say, brag about your work, but this is not about you. This is about, what you did, what you found out. And this is not very different from some of the other stories that we have heard. So one of the examples I can think of is we were brought in a little late in stage before an app was going to go live. And, someone who knew the work that we didn't feel comfortable just going live without engaging us. So they brought us in to do some usability testing before they launched. When we did our initial just basic heuristics, we could see that there were some very large issues, and our instinct was that like wait, like they shouldn't rush into this, but we didn't have data. So we immediately scheduled some testing done. And they said, oh, we have actually done testing. Here are our results. And they came back saying like, oh, 90% people figured out easily all the things, and 10% just took maybe, extra 5 minutes to figure things out. And I was like, well, that absolutely does not align with like what, we were seeing. But then we found out that they used internal people to test it. So, I mean, just from the core of it, we wanted to make sure that the testing happens in a way testing should be done. So we ended up taking um, our team to one of their centers where actual constituents walk in to interact with the state services, and just begged for their extra 10 minutes to use this app and tell us. We created a setup. We kind of made them sit, and without it being very obvious to them, we had placed two cameras, one on top of them that actually was focused on the screen and their gestures, and the other one was just pointing to their face. And at the end of it, we literally just kind of put those two together, and we had set certain tasks that we asked them to execute. And I mean, needless to say, like those results were not good. But again, if I were just to go back and tell that, convey that, the team who was already working on that app would basically defend their decisions. But this was pure data that leadership could not ignore because they saw what was happening, right? So, and again, we always operate in a very blameless way in a culture, that is focused on we should all collectively work towards a better outcome rather than us saying that, look, this is what we found and you guys missed it. But the value of that was truly something that, realized by itself, by not only delaying that app before they fixed it, but also other agencies heard about it. They wanted to engage us. And I feel like slowly, just like, one or the other things that leads to the other engagement, we were able to show the value that we bring in just like a few of those things. So I think, it's really important to make sure that the right people know about what you're doing and understand the value of what you're doing.
Such a great story about the impact of usability research. And, I've heard people say, with human-centered design, there are no proxies. Proxies don't count. And I think that, your story is like such great evidence of that, you can't go to the caseworkers who are expert in applying for these difficult services to fill it out, because if they know how to use it, that doesn't necessarily mean that their users will be able to. And so for you to go in and actually watch users in their office using the tools, having trouble videotaping it to show your stakeholders, so that's so impactful. Am I right to think that the analytics program, obviously that was an example of a very sort of high touch type of usability testing. Am I right to think that the spirit of the analytics program is similar to sort of shine a spotlight on usability issues, help people more broadly, more easily catch some of these issues? Is that where that's coming from?
So earlier, you said something where like you don't just onboard these agencies, host them on GovHub, and then you're like, all right, we are done with this, right? Truly what we are, hoping for is to constantly build the digital maturity within the state. And the analytics program truly was geared towards that. And going back to data trumps opinion, nothing better than actually having some numbers and sometimes letters in conveying how something is doing. And if you don't like it, then you can actually fix it, because that program is nothing but a mirror. And if you don't like it, guess who can fix it? It's you. So, but if you don't know how, we are here. We'll help you with it. And that's really what that was like the beginning of that. I think you and I, we both had talked about long time ago when USA.gov launched analytics. And this was back, in the Google days. We wanted to do something similar, and I think we did something similar initially. That sort of, because we actually had borrowed some of the scripts from them. They were very gracious to share with us, and what we realized was that unless someone sees themselves in it, it is very hard for them to be actionable. And then the analytics program took a turn in a way that we came up with certain criteria where, we started almost scoring and showing how well you're doing in a certain capacity. So be it the quality of your content, your website, the accessibility of your website, or just the machine readiness of your website. We used search engine optimization because that's what people quickly understand. But today we have moved way past beyond search engines, with some of the emerging technologies. But search engine optimization is still understood. So we started auditing websites based on these lenses. And that's what, kind of put that analytics program together. We were also lucky enough to partner with the governor's office and the Office of Planning and Budget. So they really saw value in doing something like that, and they threw their weight behind it. So that actually helped. They actually said that we would like for all agencies to maintain a score of, 80 out of 100. So that's a B. So that's something, don't go beyond that. And it's a fluid score. I make a couple bad content decisions, it affects my score. But tomorrow I go and fix it, it betters my score. So it's not a frozen snapshot that stays for like a month or a week. It really changes on a daily basis. So, but what that did was that brought people to see how they're doing, mostly around the leadership, because again, everyone really is very passionate about their website. And it's not just about, you know, seeing how their website looks. Now suddenly they have another gauge of how their website fares against these things that are, being scored. So if leadership cares about these things, then everybody does. And that's really where the analytics program, helped us move that needle on the overall digital maturity.
Great. Would you mind if I pull up some screenshots of what you're talking about? Because I think the visual is so compelling here.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, all right, here is a slide. Are you seeing USA analytics.usa.gov on the screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, so this dashboard, for the folks who haven't seen it, is, when Nikhil said that, this came out with USA.gov. I think, Nikhil, you probably had this experience. I've certainly had this experience lots of times of when someone has no analytics and then they get Google Analytics or they see the analytics like this, the first response is always like, wow, look at all this data. And then after a month or so, the response tends to be like, what are we going to do with all this data?
Mhm.
And so, what's so exciting, I think, about analytics.georgia.gov. So you said it so quickly, I'm sure most people didn't actually even hear it. When you talk about a score and a grade, so here on the left, you can see a screenshot of all of, a full page view of analytics.georgia.gov. I want people to see this table that I've sort of pulled out over to the right, and I'll just go zoom in even more. So here what we're looking at is a list of the websites in the GovHub ecosystem. And on the right, they actually have a score and you're grading them A, B, C, D, right? And so
Yeah.
if I'm an owner of a website, I see how I score on your system for usability, for readability, et cetera, right?
Yes.
I think this has to be so does this impact people's behavior? Do you see people, asking questions like, well, why did I get a C? How do I get a B? How do I get an A?
So this is just the tip of the iceberg. Every agency has a login to the back end of this. So if they want to truly understand why they're getting a B or a C, they go there and they see a list of things that they could fix to better their score, which is obviously not public. But this is something we did only because we found out that before making this public, we used to send weekly reports to leadership via email. And we found like 5% open rate on those emails. And, pretty much realized that this is not going to work. This is not sustainable if we truly need them to be active in making things better. So that's the reason why we made this public. The intention was not, honestly, not to, make this public in the sense of like public shaming, but truly it is more for them to just be able to get to it and see where they are. And more than the score, just click and then also see some of the stats, because when we launched this, most of the feedback came to me was like, now I can just go there and see like, are more mobile phones using our website? Are more desktops using our website? What browsers are they using? Like, so there are some of these very high level, I would say, metrics that we show as part of like the individual page. But this was something that really resonated with a lot of people, where like, why aren't we an A? And if we're not, then what can we do to fix it? So guess what you can do? Just log in. You have a list of things that you can fix. And then if you need help, we can do that. So our content team, our UX team, those are the things that we do. We go and we help them resolve those things. We plan on doing something similar for transactional applications as well, for transactional websites. We have started doing that. And you know, it is not as, I would say, straightforward as a website, but that is really the intention, is you know, both are digital properties, and as digital services, we should be doing that equally for both of those. So that is really kind of where we see our value is, again, we're just making them do their jobs better and easier and in a more efficient way that constituents benefit from. And here, by scoring it, if that moves the needle, so be it. But like I said, you know, just because someone is an A, they cannot just rest and you know, kind of coast on that laurel. Tomorrow they may be a B based on somebody else did something else, right? So that's where training comes in. Like, everybody needs to understand, like, don't put images with text in it. Or at least not without alt tags, right? So little things, and every little decision is, it's kind of like a karma program.
Awesome. So, so for people who don't know the reference alt text, what Nikhil's talking about is, you know, so that screen readers can read it too. You know, if it's just image and text, you know, then that's not accessible. And so this will ding you for it if you're not doing that. And I'm sure there's some cynical person watching now or watching in the future who will think, oh, well, Nikhil's just given A's to everyone who's on his GovHub platform. So I just want to go to the next slide to reassure people, you know, this is really real. It's not all A's on this site. You go down to the bottom of this list, there are C's. I actually, literally, when I reloaded the page, in between intending to take the screenshot and taking this screenshot, a D popped up. And so you must be running these scans and, you know, dynamically regenerating these scores constantly, right? And I've got to believe that, you know, if the head of some agency sees their you know, organization pop up on the C or D list, they probably don't want to stay there long, and someone's probably taking action. So can't wait to have you back on to talk about the transactional website version of this once you figure that out. That sounds really exciting. I'd love to squeeze in one more question, and I do want to give people a chance to ask a few more questions if there are any before we wrap here. So the question I want to squeeze in is, where are you going next? So you've done so many incredible things. You have so many incredible services. The world continues changing a lot. You know, what's on the horizon next for Georgia Digital Services?
So you probably noticed there is a little added title to my previous title. So that's what I see next. And the
Yeah, what
land
does a
of
chief AI officer do?
AI officer, right. So it's really emerging technologies, but I think that kind of doesn't sound as good for a title. But the good part is we have a good visibility into how we are doing things. Just to your point of, you know, some of the services, you know, we have been doing best practices and efforts like doing a service blueprint or mapping end-to-end customer journey. As emerging services kind of take shape, we can take a look at what our process looks like, what our service looks like, and what are some of the problem areas that we could leverage these future-facing technologies. And I feel like this just gives a great opportunity for us to mature these services and modernize them a lot better. Normally, modernizing services is very much looked at from a technology perspective, but here we can truly use technology to modernize that experience. And that's what's really is exciting me, to make sure, like, as we get into a much more understood what, mature AI landscape or any other emerging technology landscape. The fact that we have done this groundwork will help us in identifying those opportunities.
Great. I know we're right at time. Do you think we could squeeze in time for one more, just so that one of our participants has a last word, gets a last question in here?
Absolutely.
Okay. There's three questions in the queue. Here's one about AI. Has anyone tried using AI to draft suggested readability improvements? So I happen to know this is one of the ways you score people, right? That this feeds into the scores.
Yes.
Has anyone tried to use AI to simplify from college level to an 8th grade level?
Yes. That's exactly what our content team does. And what we use as a tool for our analytics dashboard literally shows you your website in a scale of, these many pages are college level, these many pages are high school level. And on the back end, it lists out those pages. And when you click on that particular page, it actually highlights words that made it high school level or college level. We aim at higher middle school level, reading level. But then our content team, who is trained and equipped to write in plain language, they work with agencies, and then if that particular page is a candidate, it doesn't have any legal information or any policy-driven information. If it's a candidate for plain language, then yes, we do that. We work with them. Now, do we use any technology to do that? Like in the past, like I know they have used certain tools. I don't know at this point what they are using or what they are leveraging, but like we definitely make sure that we try and use these tools to flag issues, but then the content team, actually works and helps them in transferring that into plain language.
Right. All right. Well, thanks for staying a couple minutes late, Nikhil. It has been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you, folks who tuned in, and thank you, folks who asked questions. And can't wait to have you back on to talk about what you've learned as you figure out all this exciting new stuff with the emerging technologies. Thank you so much.
It's always great to catch up with you, and I mean, this just felt like we're just catching up after a long time. We just have an audience.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again.